I have lived in apartment 4B for 3 years. In that time I have learned that the boiler makes a sound like a cello warming up approximately 11 minutes before it fails. That the woman in 3A has a cat named something beginning with B that she argues with on Thursday evenings. And that the elevator works on a schedule that has never been made clear to anyone, including, apparently, the elevator. I have also learned that my neighbor in 4A, separated from me by a single wall and the width of a hallway, makes the best coffee I have ever smelled at 6 in the morning, keeps exactly the same hours as me, and had been giving me every reasonable opportunity to say something real to her for approximately 14 months. The note arrived on a Tuesday. It was folded once. Plain white paper, black pen, handwriting that went slightly uphill on the right side, like the writer had been in a hurry or hadn't cared enough to rule a line, which I would later learn was simply how she wrote everything. 7 words. No preamble, no signature. Stop being polite and just ask me out. I stood in my doorway in my socks and I read it twice, and then I sat down on the floor. Right there in the entrance of my flat, because my legs had made a decision without consulting me. It is possible I had been waiting for those 7 words for 14 months. It is certain I had no idea what to do with them. My name is Cal Whitmore. I'm 32. I work in audio production. I record and mix things, mostly podcasts, and the occasional short film score, from a home studio that takes up what was meant to be the dining room and is now a room full of acoustic panels and cables and a desk that cost more than my sofa. I keep strange hours. I wear headphones so often I sometimes forget I'm wearing them. I am told with some regularity that I am a good listener, which is professionally accurate and personally convenient, because listening is easier than speaking, and I have, at various points in my life, confused the two. I moved into 4B 3 years ago after a relationship ended. Not badly, just finally, the way things end when they've been over for a while before anyone admits it. I had wanted quiet. I had wanted a building where nobody knew me, where I could work and think and rebuild the shape of my life without an audience. I had not anticipated 4A. Her name was Rosa Vega. She was 30, a structural engineer who worked for a firm downtown and who brought the job home in the specific way of people who find their work genuinely interesting rather than just necessary. She once spent 20 minutes in our hallway explaining to me why a particular bridge in the city was more beautiful than people gave it credit for. Not because I had asked, but because she had clearly been thinking about it all day, and I happened to be there, and appeared to be a willing surface. I had been entirely willing. I had gone back inside and looked the bridge up afterwards, and thought about it for 3 days. She had a plant shelf in her window. I could see it from the courtyard. 3 or 4 different kinds of trailing green things that always looked healthier than any plant had a right to look in a north-facing apartment block, which I attributed to either talent or stubbornness, and suspected was both. She had a bicycle she kept in the hallway, with a confidence that suggested she had never once considered that it might be inconvenient to anyone else. Which it wasn't. I had just stepped around it every morning for 14 months, and had at some point stopped noticing it and started navigating around it by muscle memory, which I would later realize was its own kind of information. She had a small scar near her left temple, the origin of which I did not know. She had a habit, when talking, of making a small, precise gesture with her right hand, index finger extended, drawing a point in the air, that meant she was about to say something she found important or funny, and it was usually both. She was direct in the way that people are direct when they have decided that vagueness costs more time than it saves. She was unhurried in the way that people are unhurried when they are confident, not arrogant, just settled. Certain enough in herself that she didn't need the room to rush. This is what I had collected about Rosa Vega in 14 months of being her neighbor. I had also, across those 14 months, declined approximately 9 separate opportunities to say anything about any of it. Here is the taxonomy of my failure. Opportunity 1. She knocked on my door 3 weeks after I moved in because her internet was down and she needed to send an email urgently. I gave her my password. We talked for 4 minutes in the doorway. She had an expression of focused attention when she listened that I found, without preparation, completely leveling. I said goodnight. I closed the door. I stood on the other side of it for a moment longer than I needed to. That was November, year 1. Opportunity 5, and I say 5 with the confidence of a man who has had a long time to count, was the power cut in March. The building lost electricity for 3 hours on a Wednesday evening, the result of something in the basement that the building manager described only as a situation. Rosa knocked because she had candles, and I apparently had the specific expression of someone who had not thought to own candles. Which is fair. We sat at my kitchen table with 2 candles between us and talked for 2.5 hours about everything and nothing. Her work, my work, the building, the city, the bridge she had mentioned in November, which she was both pleased and slightly suspicious that I remembered. She had wine. She poured me some. When the power came back on, she picked up her candles and her glass and said goodnight with the particular warmth of someone who has had a good evening, and I said goodnight back. And I stood in my kitchen that was now bright and humming again and said, quietly, to no one, something that I will not repeat here, but which accurately described my situation. That was March. Year 2. There were others between 5 and 9. Opportunity 7 was the morning we were both waiting for the elevator that was not going to come, and ended up walking down 4 flights of stairs together, and the conversation we had in those 4 flights was the best 20 minutes I'd had in months. She was funny in a dry, efficient way that arrived without announcement. And she had a way of asking questions that suggested she actually wanted the answer, and by the time we reached the ground floor, I had the specific sensation of a person who has forgotten to check the time and is now late for something. I said goodbye. She said goodbye. I walked to the tube and thought about the 4 flights of stairs for the next 3 days in a way that bore no relation to the distance. I have poor spatial instincts for a man who lives 11 feet from the reason. Opportunity 9 was recent. 6 weeks before the note, she had been in the hallway when I came back from the shops. And she'd had a long day. I could tell by the particular quality of her tiredness, the set of her shoulders, the way her eyes were present but pulling focus with some effort, and I had said, casually, without fully thinking it through, that I had just bought ingredients for pasta if she hadn't eaten. She had looked at me for 1 moment, 2, in a way that had some pressure in it. Not a long look, not dramatic, just 2 seconds of eye contact where something was being offered and something was being decided. She had smiled and said she was tired and just needed to fall asleep, and thanked me, and gone into 4A. I had eaten the pasta alone. I had spent the evening reconsidering the word casually, then reconsidering the look, then reconsidering the previous 14 months with the growing and unwelcome sense of a man who has been standing next to an open door for over a year and telling himself the drought was just weather. 6 weeks later, the note. I read it a 3rd time there on the floor. Stop being polite and just ask me out. The thing about 7 words on a piece of paper is that they do not leave room for misinterpretation. There are no qualifications, no softening, no plausible alternative reading. She had not hedged. She had not wrapped it in deniability or left a back door for herself. She had written the true thing in plain language and put it on paper and pushed it under my door before she went to work, which meant she had done it with forethought, not impulse. Which meant she had thought about it, decided, and done it anyway, with no guarantee of how I'd respond. That, I thought, sitting on my floor, was an extraordinary amount of courage for 7 words. In 14 months of hallway conversations and borrowed internet connections and power cuts and pasta that went unshared, I had not managed anything approaching that. She had written the note. I had been thinking about the note, or the kind of thing the note represented, since approximately November of the previous year, and I had found, on reflection, approximately 9 opportunities to say something about it, and had declined every one of them with a politeness so thoroughgoing it had apparently become indistinguishable from obliviousness. She was, in 7 words, telling me to stop. I thought about the 9 opportunities. I thought about the way she'd looked at me 6 weeks ago, that 2 seconds of eye contact in the hallway, the pressure in it, the decision being made. I understood now what the pressure had been. She had been waiting to see if I was going to finish the sentence I'd been not finishing for over a year. I had offered pasta. I am told I am a good listener. It had genuinely not occurred to me, until that morning, that listening and paying attention are not the same as showing up. That you can absorb everything about a person, their habits, their gestures, the way they explain bridges, and still leave them standing alone in the hallway. Because showing up requires you to stop being comfortable, and comfortable was the thing I had been protecting above all else. I looked at the note. The handwriting that went uphill on the right. I thought, she has been braver in 7 words than I have been in 14 months. The least I owed her was equal courage. I did not knock on her door immediately, and this was deliberate rather than cowardly. I am an audio engineer. I understand that the take you do when you're still shaking is the one you always redo. I needed to not be on the floor first. I made coffee. It took longer than usual because I found the grinder already set up and then spent 4 minutes looking for the grinder before realizing it was already set up, which is the domestic equivalent of the note I was holding. I sat with the coffee. I thought about what I actually wanted to say, which for once was not difficult to locate. It had been there the whole time, filed under not yet for 14 months, and not yet had run out that morning. What I was left with was just the thing itself, clear and simple and long overdue. I thought about 9 opportunities. I thought, the 10th one doesn't come to you. You make the 10th one yourself. At 9:30, I knocked on the door of 4A. She opened it almost immediately, which told me she'd been awake and near the door, which told me she'd been waiting to see what I'd do. She was in paint-stained clothes, the weekend kind, the ones you don't care about, with her hair pushed back and the expression of someone who has done something and is not sure if they're about to find out it was a mistake. She had the small, precise quality in her posture of a person braced to be graceful about a bad outcome. I knew that posture. I had cataloged it along with everything else, filed it under the category of things I had noticed without letting myself name. We looked at each other for a moment in the doorway. I was aware of the full weight of 14 months. The November conversation, the power cut, the 4 flights of stairs, the pasta, the note folded once in my hand, and aware that she was feeling the weight of something too, something she had decided to act on and could not now unact on, and was waiting to find out if that had been the right decision. I did not make her stand in that for longer than necessary. "You're right," I said. She blinked, just once. "I have been polite," I said. "I've been polite for 14 months, and it is the most sustained act of cowardice I've ever committed, and I want to tell you that before anything else, because you were honest enough to write it down, and the least I can do is say it out loud." She looked at me. Her right hand came up slightly, not the full gesture, just the beginning of it. The index finger lifting, the start of the movement she made when something mattered. She lowered it again, She was waiting. "I would like to take you for dinner," I said. Not casually. Not as neighbors. "I'd like to take you to a place that isn't my kitchen at the tail end of a power cut, and I'd like it to be completely clear that I'm not being polite when I ask." She studied my face for a long moment, with the focused attention I had found leveling since November, and which I was only now prepared to let level me without retreating into the hallway. "You remembered November," she said. "Not the bridge." She knew I knew about the bridge. "The other thing. The first conversation. The one where I had gone back inside and said goodnight instead of continuing." "I remember everything," I said. Something in her expression changed. Not dramatically, just a fraction of degree, the way a structure settles when the last piece goes into place. "There's a place on Crane Street," she said. "I've been meaning to go for months." "Saturday," I said. She nodded once. The small gesture came properly now, index finger briefly to the air, drawing a point. It meant something important. It meant she was pleased. "Saturday," she said. Then, from behind her, one of the trailing plants on the windowsill chose that specific moment to fall off its shelf. Not dramatically, it toppled slowly, the pot rocking once, and landed with a soft thump and a small cloud of soil on her windowsill floor. She turned, looked at it, looked back at me. "That's embarrassing," she said. "I can hold it," I said, "while you get a cloth." She looked at me for one more second. Then the laugh arrived, startled and genuine and entirely unguarded. The best laugh I'd heard in 14 months of living 11 feet away from it. She stepped back to let me in. The place on Crane Street was excellent. We stayed for 3 hours. The waiter brought the bill without being asked, and then hovered until we noticed, which was a while. She ordered dessert because she'd been wanting to try it for months, and did not offer to share, which I respected completely. She talked about a project she was working on. A refurbishment of a building from the 1930s, which was presenting structural problems that she described with the particular relish of someone who finds difficulty interesting rather than annoying. I asked questions. Real ones, not polite ones. She answered them thoroughly, the index finger coming up twice when something needed emphasis. And I understood, sitting across from her, that the quality I had found leveling since November was simply this. She thought before she spoke, and when she spoke, she meant it. Every word landed with the weight of having been chosen. I was not used to that. I found I had been waiting for it, without knowing that was what I was waiting for. "You went and looked it up," she said, when I mentioned the bridge. "I looked it up and then thought about it for 3 days," I said. "And?" "You're right," I said. "It's more beautiful than people know." She was quiet for a moment. Something crossed her face that was not quite a smile, and not quite not one. "I wrote that note in about 30 seconds, she said. "I kept waiting for you to." She stopped. She did the gesture. I was starting to think I'd misread the whole thing. "You hadn't," I said. "I know that now," she said. "What were you waiting for?" I thought about the honest answer, which was that I'd been waiting for the risk to feel smaller, and that it never had, and that I'd confused patience with wisdom and called it respect for months. "For you to tell me to stop being polite," I said. She laughed again. She shook her head. She did not look displeased. She moved the bicycle inside her flat, eventually. Not because I asked, but because we kept arriving and leaving at the same time, and the hallway logic had changed. The plant shelf gained 2 new members over the following months, one of which she brought back from a site visit somewhere and installed on my kitchen windowsill without asking, which I considered fair. It has thrived. I have taken no credit. The note is on my desk. I didn't plan to keep it. I just never moved it, and then it became something I didn't want to move, because it is the most direct thing anyone has ever said to me, and I find, now, that I want to be reminded of it. 7 words. No preamble. No softening. A year on, I still think about the 9 opportunities, not with regret exactly, more with a kind of useful embarrassment. The kind that teaches you something and then has the decency to stop burning. I missed 9 of them. She took the 10th herself. When people ask how it started, and people always ask, because the note is the kind of story that gets told, she tells it her way, which is brisk and accurate, and includes the plant falling off the shelf in a way that makes it funnier than it was. I tell it mine, which includes the part about the floor. She says I was endearingly slow. I say I was building to it. She says 7 words could have been written 14 months earlier. She is right. She is almost always right. I've learned to say so quickly, because a structural engineer with a point to make will demonstrate it until you agree. And I have found it is better to arrive at agreement early and enjoy the rest of the conversation. Nothing about it was complicated. In the end, it was just 2 people on opposite sides of a wall, and one of them finally putting something on paper that the other one had needed to read.